Is Bible history just a religious fairy tale? In his recent book, entitled Israel's History and the History of Israel, author Mario Liverani casts weighty personal doubt upon the biblical picture of the reign of Solomon and especially of early Israel's maritime trade and colonization. Dr. Liverani writes in particular that 1 Kings chapter 4 is, quote, all woven of fairy tale elements, unquote, and says further that, quote, Solomon's commercial enterprises are also quite suspect. The maritime ventures, 1 Kings 9 verses 26 through 28, and chapter 10 verses 11 and 22, involving the king of Tyre, who is said to have contributed his own experienced sailors, exhibit the literary form of a fairy tale, unquote. Page 100. I am not sure what Mr. Liverani thinks a fairy tale literary form exactly is, but the biblical text never begins any chapter with the once upon a time designation of so many fairy tales, nor is there any mention of leprechaun, gnomes, or elves. Nor does Scripture give any indication that the text is relating anything other than literal, factual, recorded history. Yet for centuries, critics have ridiculed the historical portions of Scripture as the stuff of myth and legend. Just as the city of Troy and the Trojan War were widely considered to be figments of Homer's vivid imagination until rediscovered a century and a half ago, so too the great ancient cities of Nineveh and Babylon were regarded as figments of the biblical writer's imagination until archaeologists rediscovered them in the mid-19th century. It may seem counterintuitive, but historians often exhibit the most rabid agnosticism concerning historical subjects, and even more so when it involves Scripture. One of the passages Dr. Liverani questions reads as follows, quote, and King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, with the servants of Solomon. And they came to Ophir, and fetched from thence gold 420 talents, and brought it to King Solomon, unquote. 1 Kings 9, verses 26 through 28. Historians have no disagreement with the idea of Phoenician ships trading and colonizing the coasts of Africa and Europe, yet many seemed horrified to think of the presence of an Israelite on board one of those ships. The book, The Story of Celto-Saxon Israel, published by CBIA, The Servant People, at migrations.info, is a wonderful source book to use in countering historical and biblical agnosticism. Appendix 7 contains an excellent quote from one of the most well-respected historians of the past, Dr. Robert G. Latham, concerning ancient Israel's seafaring abilities. Here is just a portion of his statement from his book. Quote, the influences from Syria and Palestine were either Phoenician or Jewish, and by no means exclusively Phoenician. The selling of the sons and daughters of Judah into captivity beyond the sea is a fact attested by Isaiah. Neither do I think that the eponymous of the Argive Danai was other than that of the Israelite tribe of Dan. Only we are so used to confine ourselves to the soil of Palestine in our consideration of the history of the Israelites that we treat them as if they were adscripti glebe, in other words, embedded to the land, and ignore the share they may have taken in the ordinary history of the world. Like priests of great sanctity, they are known in the holy places only. Yet the seaports between Tyre and Ascalon of Dan, Ephraim, and Asher must have followed the history of seaports in general and not have stood on the coast for nothing. What a light would be thrown on the origin of the name Peloponnesus and the history of the Pelopid family if a bona fide nation of Pelops with unequivocal affinities and contemporary annals had existed on the coast of Asia. Who would have hesitated to connect the two? Yet with the Danae and the tribe of Dan, this is the case, and no one connects them, unquote. Pages 173 and 4. Some scholars have no problem accepting the biblical account of ancient Israel's commercial sea traffic. For one recent example, Marvin Allen Sweeney, in his book 1st and 2nd Kings, published in 2007, believes that this sea trade by Israel and Phoenicia, quote, enables them both to become rich, unquote, page 146. Dr. Sweeney pointed out that Israel needed money to pay Phoenicia for expensive labor and materials, lumber, gold, and silver, for the construction of Solomon's temple. Solomon attempted to pay for this work by giving 20 cities in Galilee, but Phoenician King Hiram called them Kabul, a Semitic term meaning like nothing, that is, worthless. See 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 11 through 13. Dr. Sweeney believes that Solomon's temple was paid for instead from the rich profits from Israel's commercial sea trade, indicating that it must have been quite extensive. Dr. Liveroni also referred to the biblical text of 1 Kings 10, verses 11 and 22, which reads, quote, and the navy also of Hiram that brought gold from Ophir, brought in from Ophir plenty of almug trees and precious stones. For the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish with the navy of Hiram. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory and apes and peacocks, unquote. Ophir is thought by many scholars to be a reference to India, and Flavius Josephus in Antiquities, Book 8, connected it with the Sapporo area 40 miles north of Bombay. Tarshish is believed to refer to the lands of the western Mediterranean, including Spain and the west coast of Africa. Since seafaring techniques changed little from the time of Solomon until the mid-15th century AD, there is little doubt that Phoenician Israelite ships were well able to sail the coasts of the Mediterranean and beyond. There is much evidence of Israelite colonization in early Europe, especially of the tribe of Dan. Southwestern England was anciently known as Dumnoni or Danmoni, an area comprising today the British counties of Cornwall and Devon. English historian William Camden stated, quote, that region, which according to the geographers is the first of all Britain, and was in ancient times inhabited by those Britons whom Solinus called Danmoni, Ptolemy called Damnoni, or as we find in some other copies, more truly Danmoni, which name derived from the ever-continuing mines of tin in this tract, which the Britons call Moina, unquote. From his book Britannia, page 183. This compound word is therefore composed of Moina, a tin mine, and Dan, the people who mine the tin. So this most ancient region of England is properly called Danmoni, meaning Dan's tin mines. That these early inhabitants known as Dan were in fact a biblical tribe by the same name has been established by leading modern scholars such as Cyrus Gordon. If these early colonists had actually been Phoenicians, the region would have been called not Danmoni, but Phenomoni, because the Phoenicians were known as the Punic or Feni civilization. Further information on the connection of the biblical tribe of Dan with Greece, Spain, Britain, and Ireland was researched in the book The Story of Celto-Saxon Israel, found on the CBIA book site at migrations.info. Thanks for watching.